Welcome to Breaking the Silence, and I'm your host, Steve Neal. And of course, this is In Conversation With. Again, I underline that these are conversations between friends and family and experiencers and people that work in the field where we talk about the paranormal, UFOs, um, non-human intelligence. I avoid all those other words because we're not into the threat narrative on this channel. And today, I have an old friend, and I mean he's an old friend. He first reached out to me when he was 16, I believe, and had seen me back in the 90s. I had a crude website, and he offered to rebuild it. I met him at, I think, online, and then eventually I met him at a MUFON meeting down in Orange County that Melinda Leslie was putting on. And I still remember that day, Jason. And being there and Linda and everything. And you were going to build me a nice website, and that you did. And I have known you ever since. And of course, you've been involved in so much. I don't know that in all this time, because we haven't talked that much lately, that you have actually had an experience or witnessed something in the sky, but you've certainly been a dominant figure and on the History Channel and on Ancient Aliens for quite a while. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, we do have quite a long history. That for me was sparked by your talents and of course your experiences. And yeah, we've formed some really fun relationships over the years with some people that are still here and others that have passed on.
That's
Um,
true.
but yeah, it's definitely a wonderful ride to explore these topics.
Yeah. And we both like cars too. So that was always cool.
Yes, yes, for sure.
I imagine you're driving something pretty cool these days. I've got a few of them myself. Uh, just something about them that is nice to have that pleasure. But I digress. What have you been doing lately?
Well, my research, I'd say, over my career in this topic has adjusted, somewhat over time. Obviously, I was very interested in the structures on Mars very early on. At the time that we were getting to know each other, I was wondering why some of the information I'm hearing about NASA, isn't being more publicly told about. And I
It's
quickly realized because, there's some type of a cover up. You're not
yeah,
supposed to talk about
no
these topics,
kidding.
right?
No,
So,
yeah,
um,
it's
what what I what I find very interesting, Steve, is that some of the latest UFO specials that are out there today, um, new one by James Fox and a few of the others. There's an interesting new twist around disclosure, where it's finally being articulated in a way that maybe newcomers don't quite understand. But for myself and someone like you would be like, wow, it's interesting that they phrase it this way. So I'd start off the discussion by saying that some of these new specials talk about how there's the modern ways of the government trying to crack this UFO enigma, and there's task force like Arrow and ATIP that have been trying to crack this. And the key individuals from these groups, government sponsored task force to look into UFOs and extraterrestrials and such, um, before them there was something called the Legacy Program. And even to this day, the people that run ATIP, the chief scientists of ATIP, Jay Stratton, who is running it, Dr. Travis Taylor, who is the chief scientist. He's also a cast member of Ancient Aliens, right? So I work directly with these people, indirectly, I should say, not overemphasizing it. But the point is, you have Jay Stratton on camera telling you that, I get passed by the hallway in the Pentagon and people would be like, you're summoning demons. And he's like, what the hell? He's talking to top defense contract initiatives and saying, you know what? We're having our airspace penetrated by UAPs. We should look into this. And they're like, you're talking about demons. Stop. And he's like, wait a minute. I'm telling you that our sensitive airspaces around military installations are being penetrated by unknown objects. And all you can tell me is you're worried about that they're demons. So my point is there's a very new transparency, Steve, that I find interesting, that all the latest task force, which I still have skepticism as to their end goals,
you
but
and
the
me
people
both.
running, Yeah,
Yeah.
but the people running them now tell you, like when we try and get access to the legacy information about crash retrievals or some special UFO case or something that went down on record and we know it's top secret, the legacy program shuts everything down still. They're like, we will not give you access. We will not cooperate in any way. And this is what we were raised on. I was raised on in this field is anything you ask or try to get access to was roadblocked by the legacy program. That dynamic seems to be starting to get challenged today with the latest task force. And I do find that a very interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning some of the programming that's going on, like the day, not the day of disclosure. That's another issue I have. Uh, the age of disclosure is what you were talking about. They didn't use the word demons and stuff, but they said threat an awful lot. And they did not allow the people who have been closest to the aircraft that they're interested in and the occupants inside, they didn't allow them to speak. They didn't allow them to air their opinion. And when they did, of course, they had skeptics. And of course, they edited it to favor that fear threat narrative. And what I have learned after all these years, and especially Jason in the last 3 years with this channel, going on 3 years, is that despite the fear that we felt initially with our experiences, over time it evolved into something totally different. And these very people you're talking about don't want us to talk about it, and they don't want us to be heard. Um, so that's another roadblock that we've been facing. And that's why Mary, not me, came up with the idea to start breaking the silence over 2 years ago so that these people could tell their stories. And we have some amazing people, not that we haven't already, coming forward um, to tell their stories. And this stuff is just extraordinary. And the real threat, we keep being told by the NHI, is that it's nukes, it's war, and it's our own people who are the biggest threat to the planet and to us who want to just live in peace.
Well, a couple things here. It's a really like spaghetti entangled topic of
Yeah.
truth, and some deception. One of the things that I heard recently in an interview, I thought it was extremely just a couple of sentences that was like, wow, what a difference in repositioning. If we look at all of this alien technology, anti-gravitic, advanced flight capabilities, and think about from our own USA, wanting to classify and keep things secretive, if you had the ability to deploy nuclear weapons anywhere on the surface of the planet and maybe even off within seconds, that is something that they would keep classified.
Mm-hmm.
And so reframing the mind to say, well, wow, okay, so they've been reverse engineering UFOs. They've got access to UFOs. What are they using them for? Not what we want, not to explore space or further
I want
mankind or
Star
understand.
Trek.
What they use it for, Steve,
Yeah.
is instant nuclear weapon deployment systems. Meaning, if I can create a UFO that has a payload of nuclear weapons and have it go anywhere on the planet in seconds and deploy them, that's a reason to keep it
Oh,
classified.
here we
So
go.
point one is most likely a lot of
Wow.
the
They just
secretness
took us
of this
offline.
technology is because they look at it as a
I'm
weaponization
impressed.
platform, not as a way to better
I
mankind
am
or to
so
increase
impressed.
space travel, simply as it's a tool to deploy advanced weaponry in a way that is uncomprehendable. And so that's classified, right? So that's one part. It's just shifting the mind that that's how they view it, not how the public is viewing it, right? And they keep these things super secretive for a reason. The other part of it, though, which is kind of cool, is when I talk about like Dr. Travis Taylor, ATIP, there's a place called Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of the activity that they're using at Skinwalker Ranch is advanced military technology, sensing equipment for frequencies, LiDAR, ground penetrating systems, and they're actually detecting lots of anomalies over Skinwalker Ranch in the ground, in the sky. And what's fascinating about that, is that you finally have the ability now. Um, they just cut off. Okay, well, I'm still talking now without Steve, apparently. So I could continue talking because I see that it's recording, but I'm going to pause and wait a moment to see what we do. Well, it shows me a still recording, so just tell me what to do. I'm assuming you can edit this afterwards. Taking a break.
All right, Jason, I'm back in.
Okay, great.
Wow. So we're still recording, so and have been. And of course, the minute you started to talk about
I
what
know.
what the feds are doing, I mean, is it coincidence? This has happened a lot lately. And Mary's often said that, well, we're just an old couple. We're not doing any harm. We're just working with people who have these experiences and helping them tell their stories. And we're really no threat. But I beg to differ with her. They're very concerned because we're opposing the threat narrative, and we're telling people that they should be kind and empathetic, even woke. So,
Well,
you know,
I'm not trying to challenge the legacy program in any way. In fact, I've made several attempts, through my technical skills to work with some of the current companies attached to this.
right.
Raytheon,
Oh, yeah.
Northrop Grumman. There's another one called Anduril. So I respect the work, and realize that there is still obfuscation, for reasons that are classified. And if I ever do research that requires a clearance, I would, just like anyone else, respect the clearance. But um, it is interesting that today there's an influx of these people who have top level clearances, have been doing the work on UAPs, and are now, for whatever reason, have been ordained to say you can talk about things as long as they don't infringe on any of your clearances.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that in the past, right? Now these
Right.
people are like being very vociferous on camera, and the amount of information that they give us about the objects confirms a lot of the things that we thought of, right? Which is these craft are most likely using some contained force field that allows them, excuse me, to have their own anti-gravitic containment field, so that whatever's in there is not subjected to the outside world. So as you travel through
Correct.
space, air, water, maybe even solid substances,
Right through
that is
mountains.
being affected. And then
Right.
point two, right, which is really cool, and then I'll be quiet, is that the inner space, you might see an object that looks small, but when you actually go inside, it's the size of a football field, because you're now accessing some type of other dimensional space that it might look small to us, but when you're now in it, it becomes much larger.
Yeah. Well,
That is just like,
size has always been relative, distance has always been relative, and speed has always been relative, and it always will be. They're very, we make it finite, but in fact they're not. And what's really at work here, and what I know from being on the inside of the craft, is that they're controlled by consciousness. That consciousness is the ruling force here in all of that technology. And I don't think, well, it may be that the forces that be understand this, but also there's another thing called intentions, and if you have bad intentions, like using this technology to wage war on other human beings, you may not be so successful, somewhat successful, but not successful with accessing and having full control over this technology. Because from what I know about the visitors, this is all about consciousness. In fact, most of the people having these experiences we'll talk to, they're not interested in the technology at all, such as it is. They're interested in the relationship of us to them and the connection we have with them. And this is another thing that uh, people are trying to keep down. You won't hear about this on the Age of Disclosure and shows like that. There's been a lot of shows done recently that have been really alarming to me. And another one was the Manhattan abduction. That was just an awful piece of work that they did, that director did for Netflix. And it really harmed Bud Hopkins' image and the person who had the experience, who just recently passed, and
Mhm.
glorified Bud's former wife. So when you see this much um, narrative and media presenting itself so that lots of people can see it, then Mary and I have to deal with the occasional held comment and having to ban the person because you're dealing with demons. You're so stupid. You're being fooled. You're being deceived. You're being taken against your will. And of course, I just wrote something yesterday that I put on my Substack account about this. I finally talked about it, and I said, what you're describing are the people that sent my schoolmates to Vietnam, and they most all of them were killed. None of them came home. They were taken against their will. They were terrified. They were uh, uh, talk about fear. Um, and we've been trying to turn that around, and we're doing well with it. But the minute you bring it up, Dan Harar of Day of Disclosure did not want to have Whitley or anyone else on talking about the relationship between the visitors and consciousness and us. That was just taboo. And
I get it. Well, it's interesting, because those are the deeper layers of
yeah,
seasoned ufology, that there are questions to be asked. People that are just coming into these topics, that are just seeing UAP or reading a news article in the New York Times and going, "Wow, what is this? Is it real?" When you come in
yeah,
from those entry points, you're not really getting to these deep topics. You're basically,
correct.
just right. So,
Yeah,
I hear what you're saying, and
you're absolutely correct.
yeah, what I find fascinating, Steve, is that I think hopefully some of that will be bridges towards people to say, I want to find the answers for myself and look deeper. I don't think people are going to get the answers waiting around for Congress or Senate to somehow admit that they've been hiding things. Um, but what I do find interesting, and we can kind of segue into this, is that there's a lot more awareness with the military, the Navy, um, even local law enforcement and such, that are like, what is this stuff in our sky, or what is going on? And um, from my perspective, there are known areas that we call hotspots where there's been repro- reproduced
Yeah,
amounts of activity. And one of those, is literally right off the coast here, off of Malibu,
and
where we
Port
have.
Wayne, Amy, and Ventura.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even Native American Shamish, like Indians and such, that lived in the Channel Islands for like 8,000 years, talked about that they feel like there's gods or something that live under the water there. And us, from here to the islands off the coast of California, there's been lots of activity of stuff coming in and out of the water.
I can
Um,
verify that. I've seen it myself.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, a lot of these sites around the world where there's current activity, you can map them on terms like ley lines or geodetically connected spots where whatever the interest is, it's been happening maybe even for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And so that part is a little bit interesting when we can look at like cultural perspectives and find a similar conversation or similar visuals that tell that this narrative obviously isn't like something current. It's been
No, it's
happening.
not.
It's been happening for generations on the planet, and we can talk about some of that, from the show Ancient Aliens and the ongoing research that's
Right.
being covered on those topics.
That I'd like to hear that. We haven't talked that much, but since I've been living here, I'm right next to Port Hueneme CB base, right
Yep.
across the street from us, Point Magoo. Of course, we have the Channel Islands. Back in 2017, when I was on the phone in the backyard talking to Whitley, wasn't happy with my movie's ending, and I wanted a new ending. And so just to make it short, because I've talked about this before, I looked and I saw this wobbling whitish shape, like it was coming through water, coming towards me, and then it manifested, and it was this enormous silent triangle. It didn't have a big red light in the middle. It just had the little tip lights. That's all it had, and it silently moved over me. And it was just, not that I haven't seen things before, but I had never seen a triangle quite this way. It was classic. It was felt so deliberate, and I would have sworn that must have been other people that saw it, but they never talked about it, or maybe they never reported it. And it flew over, and that became the end of the film. But then after that, Mary and I saw a platform, or maybe it was a triangle on edge, and this was broad daylight. We have a film studio. I know I've talked about it, and we go from our place here in Port Hueneme over to the film studio in Ventura. It's about a 16-minute drive, and we're driving, and I see this enormous black thing hovering over the ocean. She saw it too. There was a type of ionization around it, but it was drafting down, like it was almost like it was mist or water coming off of it. It was right over the ocean. We tried to get closer to it. We came around a bend and I went past a tree. And the minute I went around the tree where we could see it closer and right on the beach, it was gone. So whatever it was, in an instant, it disappeared. We also saw a triangle when we first met each other fly over the car, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I mean, just yesterday, I saw three what looked like spheres in the sky on the way home on that same road. And then we were walking the dog, I saw another one. And it seems like it's just prolific.
Yeah, well, we use the Ring camera, and it's connected to a network of other neighborhood Ring camera users, and my wife monitors that for her own interest of safety and looking at things. And the other night, there were a bunch of people on the Ring camera saying, "What are all these lights in the sky and
Huh.
blinking lights?" And of course, I went outside and looked around, and I didn't see anything. But what is interesting to that point is, one of the things that I do, Steve, and it's gotten to the point where it's so repetitious. I've looped in a couple of my neighbors. I've got Gen 3 military grade night vision goggles. I've had them for quite a while. And then
We
I've
have a
got
night vision system as well. Yeah.
yeah, and I've got a megawatt laser. And pretty much any night that's clear, I can go out right around 6 p.m., usually about an hour after the sun is set. And there are these dots flying around at a very consistent speed, sometimes even zigzagging, or there's a few of them. They don't seem to be coordinating with each other, but they're all up at an altitude that you would think is like the International Space Station, because you can see that too. And it's a slow moving object, but it's not that. And they're always there and they're always present. And I don't know what it is. It makes me think that I've shot my laser at them and stuff. My wife gets all upset and says, "Don't do that from the house." They're not, they're not, they're very systematic in their movements. They don't respond to anything. But I do not know what they are. They're not satellites. They're not planets, or anything like that. And they're not planes. I have apps for all live data of what's in the sky. And these things are not those. So, yeah, I think it's important for us to be watching what's up in the sky on one topic, because, yeah, there's literally stuff up there, especially when you put on night vision goggles and stare for 5 minutes. You see things moving around.
Oh, yeah.
They're not
Oh,
us.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one I have, What's it called? I don't know. It cost over $1,000. That's all I remember about it is an Onyx or something like that. But it's actually a camera, and it's not goggles, but it shoots in color and also green, and it's very sensitive. I mean, the first night I used it, I saw something triangular with 3-point lights kind of turning really fast and going, and it just went below the horizon before I could get a really good look at it. I did record it because it also records. We have a Celestron telescope. We have Celestron binoculars. We haven't done much of that lately because it's been so darn cold at night, but things are warming up again. And I'm looking forward to getting in those gravity chairs because when we go out there and put some blankets on, sit back and watch, we see all kinds of stuff. And yeah, a lot of it's satellites, and yes, a lot of it's aircraft. And I can identify
Sure.
any known aircraft because I'm an aviator. You know that I've been a pilot and everything, and I know my aircraft. And I see things that I can't explain, and I've recorded some of them as well. So, my question to you is: Have you? I've never asked you this. In all the years I've known you, have you actually ever had a sighting beyond what you told me, like a saucer or a triangle or something like that you saw one night?
I only had one sighting when I was in college, which kind of sparked a lot of my initial interest into these topics. So it was in Solana Beach,
Uh-huh.
and I had a 180-degree view of the looking towards the ocean, and something flew over that looked like a cloudy mass, but had lights inside. It wasn't making any noise. It was very like fluid, and it came apart into three objects with a light inside, and then came back together. And I remember that my reaction to this was profound. That when I look up in the sky and I see something, it might take a moment, but then I'm like, plane, bird, helicopter, nothing, nothing ever clicked. And my brain, again, I was just a college student, but my brain kind of went through a little bit of a self preservation, and I was like, "Am I tripping? Like, what's going on?" Because nothing registered, and it took a little bit of time to realize what I had seen was something that might have been classified as a UFO. Um, and so now, when I look back on that, I'm like, yes, most likely, um, right time, right place, meant to happen. Not sure, but definitely was one of those pieces where I can connect the dots today and look back and say, yeah, it makes sense that there's these things happening. And sometimes when you're not even aware, you get a glimpse and you just don't have the right framework of reference to say, could this be advanced technology rather than a glimmer or something else?
Yeah. The other thing too that I always find so interesting, and I get this all the time, and this has to do with a live action film we're in production on right now. It's a short film. It's called The UFO, a real original title, but there's a reason for it. But I've what brought this up was how people say, if you had that much time to look at something, why didn't you go get your cell phone? Or back in those days, why didn't you get your Sony Handycam or a camera? Why didn't you take a picture of it? And they have a problem when you say you don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like when you see something like that. I mean, I was on the phone with Whitley Strieber of all people. We're old friends, you know that, so that's normal to me. But I was on the phone with him, and I see this enormous triangle, and all I could do is describe it to him. And some people got very angry at me and said, "Why didn't you turn your cell phone around and shoot it?" Because I didn't want to take my eyes off of it. I didn't even think to do that. It never even occurred to me. And I was so busy being exasperated that Whitley wasn't there with me to see it. Uh, that after I only thought about I could have maybe captured it on video after the event stopped. And that's happened to me before where I just you don't think to do it. Now, if I'm got the night scope out and I'm looking, I'm watching, I see something, my finger's right on that record button. So that's a whole different story. You just go, bam, you hit it. But
Right.
even then, sometimes I forget because if you've never had that moment before, most people don't even look up at a Cessna 172 when it flies over or, or a 777. They don't notice anything in the sky. So when they do see something that totally blows their mind and reminds them that maybe I've been wrong about this. It's not till afterwards they go, "Oh shit, I should have got my camera."
Right.
What do you
the
think
other,
about it?
the other thing too is people, when you don't have a frame of reference for any type of a paranormal event, it makes it hard to have a baseline for the discussion. So, as an analogy, if you had never experienced a thunderstorm and ran outside and were like, "Oh my God, what is this stuff falling from the air, from the sky? I'm getting all wet. And what is that loud sound I just saw? And oh my God, that flash of light." Now, you would be completely overwhelmed by the experience and probably in the moment would not be like, "Let me get out my camera and film
Yeah,
this," right? But what would happen is you would then come back into your house or wherever and say, "I just had an experience that was so incredible." And you would try and explain it to someone, flashes of light and thunderous sound and water. And they're just like, wow. But unless they have a frame of reference, you don't have a baseline for the discussion. And so that's what happens a lot around paranormal activity or anything to do with, UFOs is unless there's a baseline to have a discussion,
right.
most people just something clicks off in their mind and they're not able to, cross over into understanding.
Yeah, and I try not to be hard on them, because most people are just trying to get to work and back in one piece and put food on a table, take care of their families, and I get that, and I do not hold it against them, and I do not expect to be believed, and I'm not desperate to be believed. I run into this a lot. I wrote about that. And the same thing I was talking about yesterday is that I know people who have these experiences and their family's not on their side about it. They don't like it, they're uncomfortable with it, and they think maybe mom is a little off or dad's a little off. And so if there was to be disclosure, then they feel that they would be believed and they're very desperate to be believed. Um, I don't think that's a good way to be. I really don't, and I wouldn't welcome, uh, you know, disclosure being brought to the public in the same breath as it being a threat, because then, well, I believe mom, but she's dealing with the devil. So it's a really, and what you're saying is so smart about having that baseline. If you don't have it, you can't be hard on people for not believing you or not understanding you or for even thinking that you're a little bit off. You just have to let it slide off, roll off you, and stick to course. And your course is, of course, to know and learn more about this for yourself. And if you
Right.
can share it with other people and they have an open mind and an open heart, so much the better. So let's
One
talk
way to
about,
influence people.
yeah, well, look what you're doing. And I was just going to get to that. And, how long have you been doing Ancient Aliens and working with Giorgio and all those people on the History Channel?
Well, let's see. The show is ongoing now for 16 years. I want to say 15
Jeez.
or 16 years.
Wow.
Uh, Yeah, we're
Almost as much as the Simpsons.
yeah,
Simpsons.
yeah. It's incredible, and obviously we wouldn't be here without the audience and their
Yeah.
interest in these topics. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're shooting a new season probably in like a couple of weeks. So
Well,
it's still ongoing. Um,
is John Greenwald involved in any of that?
I'm sure he's been in an episode or two,
Yeah.
but John kind of does his very own esoteric work with freedom of information requests and various other
The Black
um,
Ball.
advocacies to get information.
Well,
Uh,
because one time we were all working for the History Channel. He was working for the History Channel. I was on UFO Files, and we were really having a good time back then in the 90s.
yes, yes, I remember that show, UFO Files. Yeah, that was fun. Um, that's part of the longevity of these topics is they really do go back far into our history, and the research around the ancient astronaut theory, let's say, it's just a never-ending book. It's like the book will never run out of topics to look into, uh,
Right.
and the similarity that you hear from across cultures, right? So, whether you're at like Rock Art Ranch in Arizona and you're looking at these petroglyphs on the wall and you see what look like DNA symbols and triangular type looking people, very clear representations of a gray. And you look at all these and you're saying, wow, if this was just localized to this one region, it wouldn't, might be fascinating. But the fact that you see these in New Mexico, Australia, South
The
America,
Aborigine
Scotland,
people, yes.
yeah, they all
They're
are
so
describing.
similar. And they
They're so
all have the
similar.
yeah, and they all have the spirals.
They all have the spirals. They all have the triangular people. They all have these what look like oversized head aliens. A lot of them have the double helix of DNA. So it's interesting that across cultures, they had these different forms of communication for trying to convey things that were extraordinary, right? And so, I just find those fascinating that, even in my own background, I went very heavy into ancient Iraq and looking at the stories of the origins of the Bible, Mesopotamia, Babylon, Sumer, and the gods that they spoke of, over and over, these Anunnaki. And I spent, like 10 years just focusing in on that. But,
Right.
I can look at from today's perspective and say, wow, look how much influence some of these, potential visitors may have had. The Anunnaki probably were not just localized to just southern Iraq. They may have, visited many other cultures. Like as an example, in Africa, um, still kind of in the same region, but on a completely, other separate area, you have these African legends of these gods that came down and needed to create man and help them mine for extra sensitive minerals. And what's interesting about, we just did some episodes about this for Ancient Aliens, and it's like there's an author called Credo Mutwa, and he's like the godfather of the ancient astronaut theory. He was writing about these African gods that came down from the sky, 12 years before Sitchin, and like 5 or 6 years before, Chariots of the Gods. And here we find the same legends coming out of Africa. Now, what's interesting is the comic book writer Stan Lee. I
Hmm.
love the Marvel movies, right? The
Right.
Avengers and all these things.
Right.
And literally in the movie The Avengers, Loki partners with some god, and he takes command of a space force of aliens called the Chitauri, and he invades Earth. In the movie Avengers with the Chitauri. Now,
Right.
interestingly enough, I'm looking through some of this research from Credo Mutwa about the African gods that came down and what they called them. And literally, they called them Chitauri. And I was
Huh.
like, what is this? Because Stan Lee had the insight, just like he does with many of those other characters, Thor and others, where they're based on real tales. Now, they might be mythological tales, but they can actually be real tales of great people or titans that once existed. So it's funny that even today, where we're watching in popular, genre like Marvel movies, and you hear about gods coming down through a stargate in the sky, and they called Chitauri, they're literally being sourced from our ancient mythology of gods that might have actually existed. I find that an interesting loop of how we learn about our past, even through serious topics like ancient aliens, but then others like comic book writers like Stan Lee.
Yeah. And these stories will not go away, and it keeps surfacing through people. It's almost like it's shared information on a subconscious level that so many stories have come through authors of science fiction and fantasy over the years that have come true too.
Yeah, and part of this again, Steve, is staying on the grind on these topics. I'll give you another example. Atlantis, right? Just saying that word inspires myth and legend, and the
Mhm.
possibility that, like, oh, did it ever really exist? We don't know. Well, check this
Mhm.
out, right? When you trace some of these cultures, you find a connection to this word in ways that are meaningful. Um, when we go into South America, like Bolivia, Peru, some of these areas where we have the initial uh, Olmecs, Toltecs, and then today the Mayans and some of these other Aztec cultures, it turns out that all of that amazing information that the Aztecs had, as an example, you think about the intricacy of their culture, the calendar, the glyphs. I mean, it's almost otherworldly in the sense that comparative to other cultures, they're doing
Yeah.
something amazing, right? So think about
huge cities and monuments and architecture that is hard to even understand how they had the abilities to put them together back then when we can't even do it today.
That's right. And when you see some of the connective tissue from the Aztec legends of where do you come from? How did you come to be? They talk about their ancestors coming from a land called Aztlan, and it was an island surrounded by the water. And they made a great migration to these lands where they now lived, and then spidered out into, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, the Aztecs, the Mayans, but they all came from one single source, this place called Aztlan. And if you think about that, Aztlan is not very far off from Atlantis. It's
Yeah.
just a linguistic twist. So we see a lot of these linguistic archaeological finds and can trace them through cultures to say, no, Atlantis is not a myth. It's most likely connected to a time when there were greater civilizations here on the earth. Maybe they weren't all completely human, but we're finding those evidence across 30 different cultures that still do exist, that all point to these great legends of some other higher culture that did exist in our past.
Yeah, or at least some of the culture that had technological abilities that we can't figure out to this day. I mean, how were these huge stone walls put together where, one stone was the size of a city block, but and they how did they cut it in all these sections, move it and put it back together? What allowed them to cut through that rock and put those rocks back together like a jigsaw puzzle?
We call that, yeah, that's a topic which is really interesting because it's a mainstream topic. When you
Is
look
it?
at when we look at Teotihuacan and Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman, it's
Mhm.
called Cyclopean architecture. Literally Cyclopean, made by giants. Cyclopean architecture shows all around the world that building style of these huge megalithic stones stacked together without the use of any mortar or filament. And how did they do that? One of the one of the most infamous locations, and I love to always talk about, Steve, is Baalbek in Lebanon. You
Yes.
know, you have the original stones, the trilithotons, that are still there, and they're on the third and fourth level up. Like, how did you even get them up there? Part of what I resonate with is, again, looking at the ancient texts.
Right,
The
right.
Sumerians, it's interesting too because Baalbek had different gods that they venerated over time. It was, the most recent was like Greeks, and so you have, Zeus, and then you have the Romans who venerated Jupiter. But before that, they say we inherited this from the Sumerians, who worshipped a god called Baal. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a 5,000-year-old Sumerian text written in stone, still exists, the Epic of
Right,
Gilgamesh.
right.
Gilgamesh, this hero character, talks about visiting Baalbek and seeing the ascension and descension of these loud, thunderous smoke and fire of essentially craft being used by the gods. And that's why Baalbek, in a lot of the stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, that platform is referred to as the landing place.
Wow. So, what do you say to the scientists that it's not just this subject; it's all subjects dealing with the work you're doing, the work I'm doing, the paranormal, and I think they're all connected. About it being garbage science, and I'll give you a good example, and that is if you haven't looked into it, the telepathy podcast tapes. Are you familiar with them?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, well, this is actual scientific work being done by scientists with autistic children who are non-speakers. They were thought to be, and I'll keep it short. They were thought to be vegetables. That they because they couldn't speak, they couldn't function, that they weren't in there. But we found out through scientific methodology that not only were they in there, but the way they were actually communicating with each other all over the world using telepathy, and also where they were able to read their parents' minds and know what people were thinking. And they said, okay, if that's so, let's test this out scientifically. Let's do
Wow.
the right work. and they did it, and everything showed that yes, telepathy is real. But then, the mainstream scientists turned right around and immediately discounted it and called it garbage science, the way they call the work you're doing garbage science, the way they call the people working ufology garbage science. What do you say to that? And does that have to do with that baseline you underlined earlier,
Uh,
or is it just
I'd say
obstinance?
I would say there's nuances there, right? Because if you have a hypothesis that you can have data available, then that data is what should be challenged, not so much your hypothesis. And so when you're talking about telepathy tapes, right? If there's data there that can be verified that this is happening, then yes, that should be, submittable evidence to change one's perception of this stuff, right? Some of those topics, because they're so, elusive to understand or grasp, are challenged more so. What I would say are there are levels up to that which might be easier for people to grasp, but then level down into these more deeper layers of confirmation of this type of research. So some of the ones that are a little bit more on the like higher part of the pyramid and easier to access are things, let's say, with AI. I'll give you some examples. In my what I do for a career is using AI and other technologies for business reasons, but then I
Hmm.
apply some of that also for research purposes.
AI is
And
great for that. That's all I use it for. I don't use it for
right.
anything else.
And so, like, as an example, some of the things where people might not understand our past, AI can actually bridge some of that information in ways where, you start to have new findings. I'll give you an example. There's something known as the Sumerians Kings List. And
Hmm.
it's a very old text that describes the kingship of how some of these kings lived thousands of years and passed their king, their appointed, ability to be a king down generationally. Now, in some of these, there's missing fragments that explain only a little bit, that say something like the rulers were appointed directly by, and then it would say, details are missing. Now, recently, one of the key fragments that was translated by AI, looking at a Sumerian text, came up with the missing piece where it was the fragment said a particular king was appointed by the lords who, and then there was the rest was, not decipherable. AI has now deciphered that. And so now we have a complete sentence, which just this one sentence is very directive. Now, with the translation of AI, it reads this: appointed by the lords who came down from the stars, right? So, over and over, what you're finding is through AI, there's deeper understandings of references in some of these nuanced cases where we're getting a deeper confirmation that, yes, a lot of this information was something that was passed down by people who came down from the sky, people who came down from the heavens, uh, you know, things of that sort of reference. Not, no, not necessarily saying heaven, but literally people who descended from the sky. So, yeah, it's a very interesting direct translation that, again, opens up higher topics to understand that there are levels of science and paranormal activity, that even go back into our past that we still need to try and understand,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, how it even is happening today as well. So,
The problem is that the amount of data is available on indigenous and ancient civilizations on this planet dating back thousands of years bring up star people over and over and over and over again. And the problem with modern civilization, if we can call it that, modern man, is that they have this bad habit of looking back on these people and saying, well, they were primitive. This is how they saw things. And uh, I don't think that's really the case at all. And I know you know what I'm talking about. And I really, because of people like yourself and others, you're taking a closer look at that and you're finding that there actually is something very much to it. That in a lot of ways, A lot of the indigenous people were much more advanced spiritually, consciously than people are today because they were in open contact with these star people and these people that came from the sky. In a lot of ways, it was much safer to come to Earth and mingle with the people here back then, when today it's unimaginable. If you know, if people are always saying to me, "Why don't they land on the White House lawn?" Well, okay, I'd like to see them do it because it would be over so quick. I mean, they would be attacked. There'd be all kinds of stuff being fired and shot at them and everything else. As it is, we shoot down UFOs, and that's just so terrible. And so it's really looking at how, we have more technology and we have more knowledge, and we don't have more sophistication because we shoot at things, call them a threat that we don't even fully understand. And in long range, I don't see that the presence of the visitors, whatever you want to call them, the non-human intelligence, if they had really been a threat to the earth and national security, we would be owned by now, you know?
Yeah, they've been very thoughtful to not destroy us and
Yeah.
basically show us, like, just make these small changes,
But
and
we keep making movies about it.
we do. But there's very interesting concepts around, like, who are these beings and why they're coming here, and no one really knows for sure. But if you think about the vastness of space and the different types of creatures that might exist,
Yeah.
it's interesting to note that many ancient cultures, the African Nomo, Japanese Dogon, the African Dogon, the Japanese Nomo, the god
Yeah.
of Sumerians, Enki. A lot of these are depicted as gods that came up out of the water, or depicted as a fish. And it's interesting to think about that, in the vastness of space and temperature differences and such. If 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 there are gods that came here in the past and decided to land or hide in the ocean, and maybe they still have setups there today, biospheres and things that are under our oceans. If you think about the temperature differences, if you come from a watery planet and you then come to a planet that's full of water to replicate your conditions, the vastness and difference for water is not very large. It's either going to vaporize or it'll freeze. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot of temperature difference between where you might be coming from and coming to a world like ours and being able to have some type of a biosphere that you're already used to within our oceans. And so little things like that, it is interesting when you think about why gods from so many cultures are depicted as living in the oceans or coming out of the oceans. The other part of that, Steve, is we've got 88 known constellations or areas in the sky
Right.
that we watch. 88. And why is it out of 88, only three are mentioned repetitively by 30 ancient cultures: Orion, Sirius, and Pleiades, over and over, as to why and where the gods came from. So we are paying attention and we are starting to learn things, but it's still like so many questions, because when we go back into our past 10, 25, 50,000 years, beyond 15,000 years, it's kind of like a blank slate of our understanding of cultures.
Right.
We got it butted up against now of places like Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, where, there obviously were massive civilizations, but you got to know that there's much more than that, and we just
Yeah.
have yet to discover, right? So,
Yeah. Whitley talked a lot about in his book, his most recent book, he talked about the Younger Dryas era and how,
yeah,
so much was lost when that happened. And when we were literally hit by meteor fragments all over the planet, and the fires and the floods and everything else. But somewhere in there, he talked about the fact that at that point, we shared consciousness more, and we had abilities that have been since lost as a result. And he talks about how we might be able to get those abilities back. And I often wonder that, uh, is that not something that the visitors are working with us to do? Because I know in my own evolution with these experiences is that there's no question that, um, things have changed with me and how I'm able to do things that hint greatly at having abilities that maybe I always had, but were dormant, and now they're starting to take hold more and more and more. Um, and it's
Interesting.
yeah, it's a very interesting um, state of being for me, and it's been that way for a lot of us because we know something's changing about us. We can sense it. One of the feelings is that um, we're losing that non-locality, that we're just here in this brain. I have this sense that I'm out here more, and that I'm not my body, and I am non-local consciousness, and I'm connected to it. And this has been something that's been on the rise uh, within a lot of the people in the circles who are having these experiences. Things have become a lot less physical in terms of, abduction, if you want to use that phrase. We don't like to use it anymore. But physical contact coming into the house, being taken with them for whatever purpose. It seems to be that somehow that work that they were doing back then has allowed us to be more connected with them consciously, so that's no longer necessary. And when I look back into ancient times, I wonder how much of that was going on, because it would have been easier for them to do that, because the way we've been taught by our culture right now is to turn our nose up at anything paranormal, psychic, ghosts, UFOs. Um, but I don't see that overall in the public anymore. I see uh, a lot more open mindedness. And I really think it's been a result of the work that you've been doing, and the people you've been working with have been doing, and that we've been doing personally ourselves, and Whitley and all the rest of us. We are constantly out there nonstop working on this subject matter, trying to bring what truth we can find to the public.
Well, it's an ongoing topic, and one we'll have to come back for another show and get into some of the
Yeah,
details.
I know. I
Yeah, it
know.
never stops with the learnings and understandings. Definitely a lifelong passion for me as well, Steve.
It is, and it's never stopped for you. You know, I remember you when you were 16. You just, your eyes were like saucers, and no pun
I
intended.
think I was maybe a few years older than that, probably like maybe 20 or 21, but
Yeah, are you
even that.
sure? Okay, do the math. I met you in when? 1991, 90, right in there. I met you
Uh,
before I met Whitley.
yeah, I don't remember the exact time, but I want to say I was still very young for sure. Yes,
20, 19, right around
something
in
like
there.
that,
Well, from
something
my
around there.
perspective,
Yeah,
you were quite young, and it was very
they had
refreshing.
just flipped on the internet.
Literally, I know, and you got right on it, and you've made a career of it, and I'm proud of you. So,
Thanks, Steve.
before we go, Jason, is there anything you'd like to say to our audience who is watching, who is mostly people who have these experiences, but we also have a lot of people that are just like yourself, have an intense interest in it and hold it very true to their hearts? Do you have anything to say to them that you'd like to impart before we go?
Try and travel the world as much as you can and visit some of these ancient sites and see it for your own eyes and feel the vibe for yourself. There's definitely a long connected storyline between us and the visitors and trying to unravel where it's going to take us in the future. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Okay, and we'll see you on the History Channel, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, Jason. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure as well, Steve. Talk to you soon.